This harbor is very fine, and we gave it the name Le Beau-Port. Some of the land was already cleared, and the savages were constantly making clearings.
In 1623, a charter was issued. This was the Dorchester Company.
By sweeping away great multitudes of the natives, God hath cleared our title to this land.
I don't think there's any question that the seas here were, right up to the shore, were absolutely steaming with marine life. You know,
in the 1800s, Gloucester was the fishing capital of the world, and world renowned. If you wanted to be a fisherman and be the best at it, you came to Gloucester. See this? This is the ice company. Look at all the boats tied up to get ice before they go out on the trip right here. See all the boats tied up there? Nothing. See the Gloucester house over there? There used to be 3, 4, 5 boats deep all along the Gloucester Harbor coast.
There's no fish out there anymore, so there wasn't any choice. It had to become a tourist town, which it always was to some extent, but more and more so.
My children went to the Gloucester schools, and the city of Gloucester needs this hotel. We need it now.
A serious plan would have said, yes, let's have a hotel. We want a hotel. Let's have it somewhere where it doesn't have an adverse impact on the neighborhood.
The developers coming in and building these beautiful hotels, beautiful homes.
I just love that hotel being down there.
The hotel will help to revitalize Main Street and bringing in some of their guests there, and we've seen that already.
You're looking forward to what?
The Cabana Boys.
You know, as we look at the development and the sorts of things that are taking place, the condos and the hotel, and what happens with that is that a sense of culture is lost.
You can build anything you want here. Conform to the present zoning.
I've come to the conclusion that the biggest threat to our commercial fisheries in Gloucester, it's warm water, stronger storms, accelerated sea level rise, and more heat.
Are the oceans dying? That is a question that would have seemed incomprehensible to most of us in this room not very long ago.
You're under the docks all the time, constantly working. And if you just start neglecting that constant maintenance, then the properties begin to decay, and then it's just a spiral down, and that's what we're seeing.
With codfish, it's not a pretty picture. And it is the species that may be in the worst shape of all of them at about 3 to 4% of its target biomass.
And the measurements we're doing right now are good, but they could be improved somewhat. And we think that with marine genomics, we could provide help in how we actually making these measurements.
One, 2, 3.
I'm very lucky to be working out of these buildings behind us, the old tar and Wonson paint manufactory. It was a somewhat circuitous route that brought us here to Gloucester. Ocean Alliance was looking for a new location, and we became aware that the buildings were in some distress and needed help. And luckily, with the support of the Annenberg Foundation, we were able to buy the buildings outright. So I said, is there a way for us to collect biological information? And through that has come the program we affectionately call SnotBot, which is a little drone that flies into a whale blow and collects the whale snot. This is now the most successful program we've had since Roger Payne discovered that whales sing songs. And for me, I can't even tell you how excited we are. We just wanted to collect the physical snot that has DNA, microbiomes, pregnancy hormones, stress hormones, ketones, pollutants. I just wanted that physical data. But guess what? The drone is also getting photogrammetry. We can measure the size of the animal. The drone is also getting photo ID. We can say, is that animal Ian? Is that animal Fred? And also, we're getting behavior. We can look at how the animals are interacting because we're above them and looking down. And last but not least, what kid doesn't like snot? The education outreach here has been incredible. We've got so many kids now interested in whales and drones and oceans, and technology and innovation is in our oceans because it covers 71% of the planet. The phytoplankton on 71% of this planet are the primary driver of our ocean's health. 2 out of every 3 breaths we take come from the oceans. They're not coming from the rainforests, okay? And basically, the phytoplankton is driven by the sunlight, which is it's just like the plants on the land, and then the zooplankton eat the phytoplankton, and so on. And I must say, you know, we couldn't ask for a better sort of hot point on the ocean grid, if you like, to be doing this type of work. With Gloucester's inner harbour, with Gloucester's outer harbour, and of course I feel we live on planet ocean, not actually on planet Earth. And I think humanity's future is in our ocean. And you look into the future, all the opportunities that are going to be in ocean commerce, ocean mining, ocean agriculture, drugs. The future of humanity is in our oceans. And I really think Gloucester is well positioned, not just for the region, but for the whole future economy, to be a real pivot point. And we're very excited to be part of that whole process. I don't think we realize how well positioned we are, and that's one of the reasons that Ocean Alliance came to Gloucester in the first place.
We're on a 6-acre property out here that the state owns, and with sea level rise and increasing flood events, the 6-acre property is facing those just like every other coastal community on the North Shore in Massachusetts, in the United States, around the world. And so we're really looking across teams of researchers and talking with our stakeholders about what the most relevant research we should be doing.
We're preparing in the city of Gloucester municipal vulnerability preparedness plans, looking at how we're vulnerable in Gloucester and what do we need to do to strengthen, toughen, harden ourselves in preparation for the impacts of climate change.
If we look at the coastal flood hazards data layer, and then we click on the Massachusetts coastal flood risk model, we can see flood projections for 2030, 2050, and 2070. These are at the 1% annual exceedance probability. That means there's a 1 in 100 chance of this level of flooding happening or being exceeded in any one year. We see Western Avenue, the Fort, here we are at Harbor Loop, along Rogers Street, to the State Fish Pier, East Gloucester, and Rocky Neck. This is the 2030 1% flood projection. In 2050, we see that same area, but now we've gone across Rogers Street up to Main Street over here. We see some deeper areas around the State Fish Pier, a deeper area on Rocky Neck. And then when we look at the 2070 projection, we go even further. That 1% chance has a deeper flooding into Main Street and neighborhoods along Western Avenue and the State Fish Pier.
In Gloucester, we have 760 homes with 1,300 people living at 6 feet. That's about $30 million worth of property. So if the seas rise 6 feet, we've got 1,300 people who are going to be impacted. That's not with a storm or with storm surge or waves on top of that. So we're looking at significant impacts in Gloucester at great cost. And so we have to be prepared. What's the vulnerable infrastructure? Newell Stadium, the high school, the wastewater treatment plant, Stacy Boulevard. Are they vulnerable to a 6-foot rise in sea or a 10-foot rise in sea plus a storm? Absolutely.
So here we can see the 1% annual exceedance probability, or the 100-year flood projection for the high school and the water treatment facility in Gloucester for 2030, 2050, and 2070 projections, with the darkest blue color being 10 feet of water.
2 years ago, we saw at the high school, all those cars that were moved down to the high school that went underwater. The Great Marsh, which begins here on the North Shore in Gloucester and moves further up into New Hampshire. The Great Marsh is a wonderful sponge that absorbs stormwater, but we've built up to the edges to it. You know, as the seas rise, as beaches move, as wetlands move inland, when we build up against them, then they'll have nowhere to go and they flood. So we're going to have to be prepared for the impacts of climate change on the Great Marsh, whether it's a change of species or it's flooding and its inability to keep moving as our ecosystems move. This is going to be the new normal.
It was the joint stock company of the Dorchester Company Adventurers which begat the governor and the company of the Massachusetts Bay Colony in New England. Historians are apt to hold it a small affair, but it was a company of much wealth, prestige, and dignity, whose general court meeting at Dorchester, England, was called the New England Planters' Parliament.
Colonies, as other conditions and states in human society, have their warrant from God's direction and command, who, as soon as men were, set them their task, to replenish the earth and to subdue it.
When John Smith made his 1614 expedition to New England, he was looking for gold in the hills and whales in the sea. Those were his first objectives. And if he couldn't find those, he was to fall back on bringing back codfish and beaver skins, which they knew they could get in abundance. Guess what they brought back home that winter?
And when the Europeans got here, these Renaissance seafarers, you know, they were not really thinking initially about freedom of religion. They weren't even really thinking about Puritanism. They were just here to catch fish, but they looked around and what did they see? Fish, it's all the same stuff that you see at home between England and Norway, but here there was a lot more of it, and the individual organisms were a lot bigger.
These guys were rough and hardy, a bunch of people to cross the Atlantic to a wholly unknown territory that had just been barely, it was only Champlain arrived here in what it was, 1645, something like that.
Some of the land was already cleared, and the savages were constantly making clearings. There are likewise fine meadows capable of supporting a large number of cattle.
The so-called Agawam Indians were really the Pawtucket people. They were descended from the Pennacook of New Hampshire. They came via the Merrimack Valley, the lower Merrimack Valley and the Merrimack River. They had a village here, and that was a year-round village. It was in Riverview, north of Pole Hill. The colonists called it Wanasquam, which was a corruption of the real name, which was Wanasquiguam, which means end of the marsh.
It was a very seemingly populous place with villages along the shoreline. And he actually does land in what he calls Le Beauport and meets some of these Native Americans in their very well-developed settlements with cleared fields and corn, and it was a very thriving and a very prosperous kind of an area.
But by the time the settlers arrived, the natives had nearly vanished. 80% of the friendly Namkeg and Agawam people who Champlain had found so plentiful in 1606 were dead of European diseases brought by fishermen, traders, and explorers like Champlain himself.
They died in heaps as they lay in their houses, and the living that were able to fend for themselves would run away and let them die, and let their carcasses lie above the ground without burial. For in any place where many inhabited, there had been but one left alive to tell what became of the rest. The living, as it seems, not able to bury the dead, they were left for crows, kites, and vermin to prey upon. And the bones and the skulls upon the several places of their habitations made such a spectacle after coming into those parts, that as I travelled in that forest near the Massachusetts, it seemed a new-found Golgotha.
I come here, I feel like I'm coming back to my roots. My mother was born in 1910, and at that time, my grandfather, Angel Paulison, rented this house. It had been Fitzhugh Lane's house, Fitzhenry, now called, the painter. Lane certainly was very much apprised of transcendentalism. That sense of there being a spiritual luminosity that appears in the poetry that's written at the time, and that it appears in Lane's paintings, and appeared in no other paintings that were being done at the time. And so the art historians coined this term, beginning with Lane, of luminism. He designed and had this house built for him to live in and as a studio, and worked in this studio. It gave him wonderful views, and it situated him in the center of Gloucester. But when my grandfather rented it from the owner at the time, it was he and my grandmother and their children, and my grandmother actually operated a boarding house here. And I have a photograph of the entire family sitting on Greek Easter on April 14th, 1914, in front of this house with my mother at the age of 4 and her 2 sisters. There were dozens and dozens of houses here, which were lived in by fishermen. You did get a really astounding view of something that's practically disappeared now, which was a very intense sense of a working waterfront. Because when urban renewal came to Gloucester in the late 50s and early 60s, pretty much the working part of this neighborhood and all of the infrastructure was taken down, along with all of the houses that surrounded the Fitzhenry Lane house. And a very intense, powerful, thriving, ethnically diverse neighborhood was destroyed by urban renewal. The poet Charles Olson called it renewal by destruction. The Maximus Poems, which is Olson's epic poem about Gloucester, Gloucester's past, the present that he lived in, and an imagined a projected future. There was the dimension of history, the dimension of reality, the dimension of Olson walking through the world and through Gloucester in those poems, the dimension of Olson walking on Dogtown. The Dogtown poems come out of his walks on Dogtown. And at one point in the Maximus poems, he says, "Turn your back on the city," and he faces toward Dogtown, and begins to write about Dogtown in greater depth. Dogtown was interior. It was the interior of Gloucester. It was the prehistory of Gloucester. It was the unconscious of Gloucester. In Dogtown, Olson saw the origins of the world. He went back to the very core of Greek mythology in Dogtown. And in the Dogtown, he quotes actually the theogony in which the origins and the genealogy of the gods is traced. And the first letter from Dogtown begins with a quotation from the Greek to a very mythical story, a myth of Gloucester, the story of James Merry, who was a sailor who, drunk one night, went to Dogtown to wrestle with a young bull, to show off to Gloucester how masculine he was. And the young bull killed him. And when people went up the next day, they found Mary's body gored by the bull. What that meant to Olson was not only the actual story of Mary, but the myth of the human person against the force of nature. It reminded one of the bullfight, which is both actual and has a mythical dimension. And it is a kind of story of origins in terms of the symbolic value of the bull of Minos in Crete, for example. And Dogtown also was a place where early settlers, there was an actual settlement in Dogtown. So there were people living there. They were living close to the land. They were living off the land. They had, in some cases, not a lot to do with the people who were living on the waterfront. So he was fascinated by this separate community that was related to the larger community, but was self-contained. And actually, toward the end of the Maximus poems, he writes that Gloucester has become like the USA. That Route 128 has brought indeed something to Main Street, change. That tourism is now turning Gloucester into a destination. That the kinds of boats you see in the harbor more and more are motorboats.
From the 1830s through the 1850s, coming out of Lane's Cove, coming out of Pigeon Cove, were many of the foundation stones that go into all the houses around Cape Ann. And the shipping log showed us that, you know, a ship would be loaded in Lane's Cove and go over to Gloucester for the day, take foundation stone out and come back for another load. This whole scraping away of the landscape exacted a very big toll on Cape Ann. By 1886, the woods had been burned for the driving of steam to power the tools and for the locomotives. And it took until the 1880s for Cape Ann to wake up to the fact that they were looking at very close to the conditions of a strip mine. There was a huge industry all really centered around Cape Ann. And the people that roll into it were all businessmen and lawyers from Boston, utilizing the stone sloops and the Maine sea captains who had been transporting granite. But now they were setting this up as a business. It was the Rockport Granite Company of Massachusetts. And their business was, we take granite out of the ground, we market it, and we sell it.
I went to college after high school, not because I knew what I wanted to do, but I got exceptionally good grades and I got a scholarship, and I saw that as an opportunity to leave this town and, you know, be able to go out on my own. And I do think that was a wise decision, you know, with the wisdom of years looking back. If I was underneath the burden of, you know, $80,000 of debt, I would definitely regret it. I have a number of friends who have to make very important life decisions based on the fact that they owe so much money, and I've always had the freedom. I stuck it out and I did it, but when I got to the end of that 4 years, I was done with academia. I had started doing stonework and I had started doing carpentry, and it brought me great joy. I make these amazingly sophisticated templates at my house with hand cut with a what are those called? Oh, X-Acto knife. It's very fancy. So I put it on, I trace the number, and then you start in the middle and you basically carve yourself out a channel in the middle. You could also probably come back at some time, like I'm gonna paint this, and then I assume it's gonna be right here on the road, so you could always get, you know, like a finished product shot. And so with carving, you know, you never want to chip the surface, obviously. So I use 2-pound hammer, which prevents me from hitting it too hard, and I have little baby chisels.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, it's a world apart from, you know, like stone shaping, like you've seen me do at the quarry. That's like, it's a lot more like brute strength. It's a lot harder on my body. Like I can do this all day long and feel fine. But if I have to like, you know, square stones, square blocks all day, I feel it. And that's also like one of the reasons that I kind of cultivated this skill, because I get paid really well to do it. And the impact is far less severe than, you know, other chiseling on rocks. It's like, it's totally, I mean, it's like rock carving for ladies. I'll just be the first to say it.
It's what?
It's rock carving for ladies. You know, like this is what a hammer's supposed to be, and then this is the little lady version.
Done. Oh, you suck. Hey, do you think you've disappointed anyone by your choices?
I think initially I did. You know, I think my mother, for example, probably thought that I was making some bad decisions, but my mother sees me now and she sees the work that I do, and she's like over the moon proud of me. You know, people from that era of my life, I think, are the only ones who would be disappointed. But I don't think anyone sees me that way if, you know, they see me separate from, you know, the big promise of, you know, graduating valedictorian and being really smart, you know. I mean, I still use my brain on a very regular basis.
Do you?
Yes. I try.
I'll spread the word.
No, don't tell anyone. It's better this way. It's my disguise.
Gloucester, Massachusetts, hold on to my soul, like the red flag at the end of the greasy pole.
talking with the fisherman statue late one night, and we didn't always agree on everything, but the one thing we did agree was that we missed the old First Baptist Church. Talking about Joan of Arc and all this stuff is important to me. I don't know if it's just childhood or it's this town. This town, I became aware of things in this town.
How was your father related to this church?
Well, he was the minister. When he came for his audition Sunday, we were stuck on the other side. The big bridge hadn't been finished yet. We were stuck on the other side of the cut, and he was supposed to be in the pulpit. So he was a little bit late for that one, for his audition. But, it's Gloucester. When I preached that Sunday, I talked about, how he would write his sermons on Saturday night, and then watch Gunsmoke. and how I used to stare at him until I could see a halo over his head, stuff like that, But, I grew up in the church. That was my childhood. I didn't know anything different. My mom was in the choir sometimes. I was in the junior choir here. But, Louise Ellis, I see these old bulletins, and every Sunday she's singing. She must have started singing in the church when she was in high school. And then, we moved here and she passed away, and I went to the funeral home over here, and I talked to somebody from the church, and she kind of filled me in a lot of stuff. She had Alzheimer's and stuff when she was in her last days, and she was having a tough time, but she could remember music. The music, you can remember the music.
What did they do with the church?
I don't know, probably just big rubble. They saved a couple of the stones, and they did stuff with the stones, but they broke all the stained glass windows except for one round one, which if you go into the church on Gloucester Avenue, they have it on some kind of a table, but it was up in the air, like if you're looking at the minister, it's behind there. And behind where the choir is, it was up there. But that's all they saved. I don't know if they saved old Bibles and stuff like that. Probably not.
Why did they tear it down?
And they wanted to tear down City Hall too during those days, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that they wanted to tear this down while we were living there. Because old and in the way, I guess.
What's there now?
A parking lot. And the parking lot seems tiny compared to this, And then the Moose Hall was on the other side. And the Salvation Army was across the street. Standing in that parking lot and having the feeling of the baptismal pool and hearing the choir and all of this stuff, it just comes rushing back to me.
And that's all gone.
It's all bottom line and money, money, money. That's it.
You think it'll work, the hotel?
Hotel? I don't know. They hope it will save Main Street because, it's like every main street in America's been, losing since the malls came in. And now that they're, the malls are losing because everybody's sending away for stuff. But, maybe it will bring more people in, and maybe they'll go into the restaurants. Maybe they'll buy a book. Maybe they'll buy things. That's what they're hoping.
That's going to change Gloucester.
Already has. See, that building is just converted to 3 units. This new building they're building here is going to be 3 units. See the building up on top? That's also owned by Beauport LLC. You never read that in the Boston Daily Times, but piece by piece, the gentrification should be complete in 5 to 10 years.
When I was fishing, I was able to see back in the 70s and 80s the end of a very important and full fishery, and just see it transition into a less and less, just a smaller shadow of itself, really. So I was very fortunate to be able to see how it was when vessels were coming in laden with tonnage as opposed to pounds.
You do something. We should do something to find out what we're doing and be proud of who we are. There is no lost soul unless you make it lost. There was too many fishermen that were lost, and yet their strength should be, their family strength is should what make us keep living and going forward and saying to those families, they didn't lose in vain. We have fishermen, we are strong, we have the fishermen's, the memorial fishermen's statue, we have the fishermen's team, the fishermen's church, we have everything else, but what we have is the fisherman's soul, the heritage of our waterfront, our working waterfront. This whole island started on fishing.
The impression I get about this piece, it's just one of the most beautiful pieces of art I've ever seen. Beauty, just beautiful. What, does that resonate with you in terms of what you were after or what you've accomplished?
Was I after that? Yeah, I guess. I certainly wasn't after this piece. Wasn't after mediocrity, I'll tell you that. Yeah. Was I after that? Yeah. Yeah. Does every piece work out that way? No. But the only way you're going to find out if a piece works out that way is by making a lot of pieces that don't meet that criterion. Gotta kiss a lot of frogs. Kiss a lot of frogs. Right? Does everyone turn their prince? No. But if you kiss one frog and it doesn't turn to prince and you go back in your hole, no. Doesn't work that way. This is a political piece of art on one level. It engaged you in the conversation about what's happening in Gloucester, what's going on with the fishing industry, and the no regulations, and warming of the oceans, and depleting fish stocks. But I find that I don't like propaganda. I don't like telling people what to think. You want to, and I think on one level, everything is political. I was taking the bus, and the bus driver was a fisherman, but now he's a bus driver, and we pull up, and he looks at the water, and he says, and this town used to be, fishing industry used to be like, fishing has gone the way of the dinosaur in Gloucester.
Yeah, they used to pull the fishing boats up here and work on them. They would pull them up at high tide, let the tide go out, scrape and paint, put them up on lifts, scrape and paint. They all had small boats in the old days. My aunts and grandmother used to come down to this beach with their aprons, and the fish were so plentiful they could just go knee deep into the water and scoop the fish with their aprons and throw them up on the beach.
Oh, yes, sir. Oh, that time I remember. We'll get a colander. My mom would give us a colander, and I would go in the beach. Everybody would know, and they would tell everybody else, and they'll all do the same thing we're doing. And they'll all go home the house to get a colander and soup all the little fishes as big as my finger. Take it home. Mom would cook them up. Oh, God, were they ever good. Oh, my God. We ate from the ocean. We actually ate from the ocean. My parents come from Palermo, Sicily. Yes. My father had a brother in Boston, and he told him to come to Boston. He went fishing, and the boat docked in Gloucester, and he fell in love with Gloucester. Because going to Sicily my father's and mother's birthplace and where they lived, it looked like the fort, exactly like the fort. And my God, that made my dad so happy. So when he got in from fishing, and he had a child there, Nat. My brother Nat was born in Boston. One child was born in Boston. Packed up the kids and everyone and came to Gloucester. We were very, very poor. And I tell you, my mom and my dad did everything possible to keep clothes on our backs and food on the table. So having 6 brothers, 5 of them had to leave school at the age of 14 to go fishing, honey. And they're never hardly home when you give birth, or weddings, or anniversaries. I was home just for one baby. I had 2 boys and 2 girls. And he wasn't there.
I didn't really know who my father was until I was about 5, and because he would come home for 2 days and then he would leave for 2 weeks, so we really didn't form a bond. And I remember waking up early one morning, and he had come home during the middle of the night, and I didn't know. And I saw someone in my mother's bed, and I thought it was her, so I jumped into bed and said, "Mom," I went to give her a hug, and it was my father. And I started crying, and I ran out of the room, and I ran into the bathroom where my mother was. And I jumped up on her lap, and I remember saying, "Mom, that man is here. That man is in your bed." And she started laughing at me, and she said, "That's your father." And so that's what sticks in my head.
Boy, that's
the most. That was my introduction to my father.
So it was really up to your mom.
It was. She handled everything.
I was only 8 years old when my sister Helen was born. 2 years later, every 2 years my mom would have a baby. 2 years later, Kathy, that you met, Kathy was born. She was a 14 birth, 14 pounds. My dad had to go out and get a bigger basket. We used to have small baskets to put the babies in. He had to go and get an extra large basket to put my sister Kathy in it. Yes, and we go on. I took care of them since the day they were born. And I love taking care of kids. I love it.
She was a wonderful mother.
And she was a caretaker for a long time.
She did it for a job. She was a licensed CNA. She got her license at 68 after my father died. She went back to work. So she got her license and did home health care until she was 84. So she took care of the elderly while she was the elderly.
I'm a certified nurse's aide, and I took care of babies and older people, and I loved it.
That's you on the left, right?
That's me and my special child.
How do you mean special child?
She's a Down syndrome. A Down syndrome.
In the picture.
That's her.
Here.
Yes.
And who is the other woman?
Who's it look like?
Is that Gina?
That's Gina. Yeah, she wrote a book. For the love. All about her and Serena.
Oh, so this is Serena.
Hi, Serena.
Favaza. Grace's daughter. Right?
Yeah, that's me.
So Serena loves art, huh?
Yeah.
And she feels that she's just like her brother when you do your art.
Yeah.
And she has done all different modalities. She's worked with sea rocks and sea glass, and she's done some sculpting. She's done acrylic painting. She's done some watercolors. Everything has come out really well. So I don't think you have a favorite. What do you like to do the best?
My mother's jewelry.
Your mother's jewelry. Did you make that?
Yeah, I made this.
With what?
Jewelry. My mother loved that. Be happy.
Your mother's jewelry?
Yeah, my mother's jewelry.
Oh, it's beautiful.
Thank you.
Then my mom had 14 birds. I was the 11th child. The older one was this Vito, my sister Vincy, my Sammy, Joe, Tommy, Mary, and I was born there. I was born at 2 Fort Square, down the fort. I love the fort. 1928, March 19, 1928. I've had a wonderful, wonderful childhood down that fort. I don't think the younger generation would ever have a childhood like I had, like the people down the fort have. Well, they didn't stop having their children because at that time they didn't have television. So, oh, cheating, I'm terrible. That's going to be televised, oh my God. But that's the truth. We would go down Pavilion Beach. That was our playground, and our mothers knew that we would be safe at Pavilion Beach. Then when we feel that it's time for us to go home, we will go home and Mama will feed us. And I tell you, it was just a great, consider it. We were so poor, and we didn't know we were poor. We were happy.
I started digging clams when I was 9 years old. My dad was a commercial clam digger. On the weekends, we'd go clamming with him. Back then, you could shuck clams in your cellar. And I started shucking clams when I was 6 years old. So we'd go digging, we'd come home, we'd go down cellar until supper time, go up and eat supper, go back down till bedtime. Yep, my mother was half Indian, my father's Portuguese and Indian. And my daughter, Shiloh, she digs even today. She just had a baby 3 months ago and she's down there digging with me again.
I dug until I was 7 months pregnant, and then my belly got too big, I couldn't bend over no more. And when I had her, I took 3 months off, and...
Hi, Maze. Hi.
Went back, and now I'm back.
Wow.
Yep.
It's a hard living. I've had 4 back surgeries. I have 2 herniated discs and a bulging disc. They want to go in and fuse it. And the first thing I asked the doctor is, can I bend over after?
Is it painful?
Oh yeah, I'm in pain 24 hours a day. And my neuropathy, I don't feel from my knees down anymore. No, I've dug clams with staples in my spine.
Oh, God.
Oh yeah, it can't keep me down. If I can bend over, I'm going to bend over. No, nobody pays my bills.
Right. So will you retire?
When they carry me off the clam flat.
My bags are frozen. That's a good one.
How much does that weigh?
This one's probably 25, 30 pounds.
You ever find anything when you're digging here?
Old bottles.
Come all you bold fishermen, listen to me, and I'll sing you a song of the fish in the sea. Yea ho, little fish, don't cry, don't cry. Yea ho, little fish, you'll be a whale by and by. You go to fish school and you learn from a book how not to get caught on that fisherman's hook. Yea ho, little fish, don't cry, don't cry. Yea ho, little fish, you'll be a whale by and by. And there's 7 other verses to that, which is pretty lucky because I have a 3-year-old daughter at home and I can get to sing that to her every night with my wife, so it's cool.
What boat is this?
Schooner Adventure, the most famous, biggest money maker in the history of the Gloucester fisheries. Not by terms that she was so great for any certain period of time, but for her longevity. Many boats were lost, she kept going and kept fishing, so now it's sort of a landmark of Gloucester. It's like the Man at the Wheel, or Our Lady of Good Voyage Church. The Schooner Adventure is symbolic of the great fishing days. And they've done a great job restoring her. It's just such a majestic vessel. You know, you feel that old-time schooner days when the harbor was dotted with schooners like that.
We had the ship going 13 and a half knots, which is the fastest we've had her in 2018. And then when we depowered by 1 sail, by the second largest sail, we're still going 11 and a half. So it's awesome out here today. We're having a good time. The crew's getting a really good exercise.
The Adventure was a highliner of the fleet. It made more money than any schooner vessel out of Gloucester. And the captain at that time was from Newfoundland. His name was Leo Hines, and his nickname was In and Out Hines. And he had so many trips in and out. He was just bringing in tens of thousands of pounds of fish all the time and unloading them up in Boston and going right back out again, just keeping the boat going. And that's what they fished for. They made money.
Leo and Adventure would land more fish than probably any other sailing vessel in American history.
That was pretty dangerous sometimes, dropping those dories. Drop them on one side and steam along a while, and then we drop the other side. Each tub of trawl had 550 hooks. We usually only set about 3 tubs. Each tub would take about an hour. The 3 tubs would be about 3 hours pulling it in. But when they'd first start, you know, the tide would be running, the current would be running pretty stiff, and it would take them a little longer. But as the tide slacked up, they do it much faster. Well, as soon as the first dories got aboard, of course, they start dressing. Because you had 30 or 40,000 pounds of fish would, you know, take about 2 or 3 hours to dress them all down and get them iced down. Well, they never get much sleep anyway in the summertime. You'd get up probably 1 o'clock in the morning to bait the trawls. That would take 3 hours. Fish all day long and get them back aboard. They'd have to dress the fish, and then you'd get 3 or 4 hours sleep. It was a sort of a challenge.
Until 1906, it was basically a hook fishery. There was a little bit of gill netting in the late 19th century, but for the most part, if you were after cod, you were hook fishing, pan lining, long lining.
I don't know. I don't think I'd want to do it again.
Early 20th century, 1906, Bay State introduces the first steam trawler. It's called the Spray. Wow, this ship she could fish hard. And what we have is the entire town of Gloucester, arrayed against this vessel and vessels like it. And when legislation was introduced in the U.S. Congress by a Massachusetts congressman in 1911 to outlaw landing fish in the U.S. caught by trawlers, by draggers, Mayor Fitzgerald of Boston He said, we can't bring these ships in. The Gloucester Board of Trade sent a man to Congress who testifies that the entire Gloucester Board of Trade is against the introduction of this technology because we've seen what it would do in Europe. It'll wreck the fishery. So they knew. 1911, 1912, 1913, the fishing interests of New England were almost uniformly arrayed in opposition to the introduction of steam dragging. But the Congress dilly-dallied, and after a while they didn't pass the law, and draggers came. And by the 1920s, 1925, Gloucestermen, Provincetown guys, other guys in New England, Maine coast guys. If you can't beat them, join them. The fishermen had said, well, this is the new normal. This is what we're not fishing schooners hook fishing anymore. We're fishing these steam-powered and then soon to be gasoline-powered draggers. And so they changed over about 15 years from damnifying them and saying that they would be the destruction of the fishery, which they were, to saying, it's what we got to do. Catches are going down and the other guys are doing it, and if we don't do it, the Canadians will do it, so we got to do it.
When the war broke out, they took two of my grandfather's older sons. Benny and Charlie went into the service, and he had nobody to take out his boat. His oldest son left him and went with his wife's family to take out their boat. So my grandfather had to put my father on, who was maybe 25, 26 years old, something like that. And what happened was they were fishing for redfish at the time. That was the big going fish during the war. They were using the ocean perch for the services. And there was an abundance off of Maine, like Mount Catcher's Ledge and up that way. So anyway, what happened was there was a crew of 5, and they had fished for like 36 hours non-stop, loading up the boat with redfish. So my father gave one of the crew members the wheel and said, okay, let's go home. But an hour later, he fell asleep. The boat hit the rocks up in Mount Desert. The boat was a wreck, but the crew was all saved. The story is my father hid up in Maine for a week. He was afraid to face his father because they had no insurance. And it wasn't until his brother came up and got him, his brother Benny, said, look, Gramp said it's okay, come on back home, we're going to build a new boat. And that, when my uncle told me he went to, and I remember him telling me this, we went to the bank, he went to safe deposit box, and he took out $10,000 in cash. Went to Story Shipyard, he slapped the money on the table, how soon can I have a boat? Exact words from my uncle. He said, I think we can build it right away. Within a year, they built a new St. Rosalie. That was in 1947 or 48. I was only 7 or 8 years old, but I remember my aunt smashing the bottle against the bow. They're going into the river, and the whole family was just all excited and all lit up because we had a new boat. My father ran that boat for quite a while before we sold it to the San Filipos somewhere in 1970-something, something like that. Yeah, it sank at the dock, and they didn't know what to do with it. They couldn't sell it, so the city made them bring it down to the beach and disassemble it.
This was the last one that was built in Essex?
Yeah, one of the last, according to the paper, 47, the last one built in Essex.
you know, it's a wood boat, it's a lot of maintenance. Even when they're brand new, they're a lot of maintenance, and they're a lot of work. And this was built in '47, and a lot of the stuff is, it would be like buying a 1947 car, you know? It's real cool, but they're a lot of work, you know? These boats here were pretty labor intensive, you know? They went out with, you know, 7, 8, 10 guys. You know, the boats go, a lot of the boats now, they go out with 2 or 3, you know.
Oh, they're tough. I guess it was the keel that was holding it, huh? For a while there?
Well, that's like the backbone, so, you know, just like a person, they're okay till you break their back and then they're junk, you know.
I left my home so long ago now that I would not recognize my own face. I constructed the boat of my life, and I set out into the open sea, waving to all of you who knew that the seas would give me everything I could handle and everything I could not. And yet they waved, and yet I set out into the boat of my life. Built from soul, crafted from heart, with the great innocence I pushed off and been away from my home for so long that I would not recognize my own face. But I know at home, home remembers me.
The Magnuson Act of 1976 was meant to Americanize the fishery. This was the time in which our nation and many nations in the world imposed the 200-mile limit. So the federal government would control the waters surrounding the nation out to 200 miles. In part, this was to get rid of the Russians, to get rid of the East Germans and the other countries that were out there fishing these big ships 3 miles off Nahant. You know, it was crazy.
When I started, all right, when I first went, 1964, there were still Russian trawlers fishing inside of 3 miles. I mean, not little boats. These were 700-foot boats that went trawling, pair trawling, 2 boats carrying a giant net. I watched, my father used to bang on the stair, they'll ruin it, they're gonna ruin it. They took a lot of fish out of here. I'm talking, you'd see these boats and they'd be out of the water, and by the afternoon, they'd be low. And then another big boat would come in and they'd pump the thing dry. And they kept everything. They didn't throw nothing away.
What we did as a country shortly thereafter was pass some very short-sighted legislation that allowed fishermen to amortize the cost of a new boat. And we increased the fishing capacity of the fleet around in the early 1980s dramatically. Okay, the fleet went from about 800 boats, 825 boats, to over 1,400 boats just in New England. And so instead of getting our house in order, which would have been a perfect time to do it, driving away the foreigners and the rest, we didn't. We began to hit the fish even harder. Unfortunately, while a number of marine scientists said we need to reduce pressure on the fishery, the idea was now we've gotten rid of the foreigners so Americans can go at it. And so instead of getting our house in order, we began to hit the fish even harder. And so, as I said, 1992 is typically seen as the low point of the cod fishery, but it didn't take long. So it was a disastrous act in many ways.
I don't think we'll ever be able to ramp up the fleet again. Even if the stocks come back, the technology has gotten so you can harvest so much fish so quickly that I just don't think the stocks could ever take more boats fishing unless they change how we fish. I'd love to see more longline boats because I think it's a great way to fish. The longlining is generally you're only going to catch certain species, cod and haddock primarily. You can't really fish a ton of hooks to catch thousands and thousands and thousands of pounds at a time. So you're doing it just one at a time. And they're all coming up alive. So if an undersized fish comes up, you can unhook it and release it and watch it swim away. So I just think it's better for the stocks. You're not taking out as much at a time. The fish are all alive.
And you do think that longlining is a more sustainable way? It's less efficient?
Yeah, it's way less efficient. One fish at a time. It's so labor intensive, nobody really wants to do it anymore. But you have a nice quality fish, they come in alive.
I noticed when I went out with Peter, the most upsetting thing I saw was when the fish come in and get rolled up on that reel, they're just getting crushed. I mean, it just was horrible to watch that.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really I don't know a ton about dragging. I've never done it. I don't agree with it. That's where the efficiency thing comes in. It's definitely the most efficient way to harvest fish.
Does it have an effect on the bottom?
I think it does, and I think you're rolling things over and killing stuff, and I wouldn't say that it's great for the bottom. I think they've come a long way with technology, and there are some doors and nets that don't scrape the bottom quite as hard.
When you fillet a fish, the 40% is the fillet, 60 to 70% is left over, and that's what we call gurry, and that's what we use to manufacture the fertilizer. So instead of dumping it back in the ocean, which was extremely expensive and wasteful and bad for the environment, now we can utilize 100% of the fish. After the fillet is removed, the rest gets ground up, cold processed all the way through, liquefied and stabilized to bring the pH down so it won't rot. And that's it. It comes out looking like chocolate milk, and it's got all the nutrients plants and soil need naturally in the perfect balance from the mineral-rich North Atlantic Ocean. It's nature's perfect source for fertilizer, and it's organic. We sell it in 4,500-gallon tanker trucks all over the country, 275-gallon bulk totes, 55-gallon drums, and then we have the retail sizes, so it's national and actually international too. We do ship overseas as well. Haddock, cod, flounder, hake, cusk, pollock, dogfish, redfish, bluefish.
I don't know why they don't open up a fish hatchery. You know what I mean? Why you got chickens and you don't have enough eggs, you hatch eggs, you open it, you know. We'd never have enough eggs if we just walked around and picked the chickens' eggs off the street. You know what I mean? You'd have to do something. You want to feed all these people, you have to make prep. It just doesn't happen by itself. You can't take them all out and not put none back.
We're at this stage now where we have to do something proactive, and we have the intellectual, academic resources. We've got the fleet here who knows how to do what needs, the catching of the fish part, that's known to us. So we have all the parts, and the question is why, why aren't we where these guys were back in the day, doing these things that are known to us but yet lost to us at the same time, because we've moved on. we need to maybe go back and revisit. I was showing you this here too. Yeah, see, this is the fish hatchery that was on 10-Pound Island back in the day. And it was a federal program. You know, the United States Fish Commission did it. And we've just gotten away from it. You know, sometimes you get so far away from something you actually forget, like, oh yeah, we did that. Why did we stop? Why don't we try that again? And I think that's where we're at right now, because it's at a crisis point. It's at a tipping point in the history of not only this place, but in fisheries in general.
My family were all fishermen, you know, my father, my grandfather, my brothers, my uncles. So more or less fishing has just been in my family since I was born. You know, I always thought they bred me to fish. Oh, I think, I don't know, 5 years old, 4 years old, I was across the street in the pond trying to catch fish. You know, I lived on Eastern Avenue and Day's Pond was right across the street. So they'd walk me across the street in the morning, they'd come and get me in the afternoon. I'd stay there all day.
As we're thinking about building up and development, what are we going to replace the precious culture that Gloucester has enjoyed for so many generations with? Because, in fact, a consumer culture is really not much of a culture for anybody to hang a hat on. Kids don't grow up well because they belong to a consumer culture. They grow up well because they know who they are and whose they are and who they belong to, and have some sense of a deeper identity and a deep sense of belonging. And I think anytime there's the sense of rootlessness that comes with development and that comes with a community changing rapidly without a very conscious decision, this is who we want to be, there's just a hole and an absence.
It's too bad, because Gloucester was a real family-knit town at one time. It's getting destroyed. They're building houses, they take these houses for the rich people, where people like us, we could never afford one.
This boat wasn't much money, it was $9 grand, but when I bought it, it was all rotten. The stern was all rotten, the sides were all rotten. I just saw the boat, the doors, the net rail, I jumped, you know, a bigger boat, I'm gonna take it. Put new ribs in it, 26 on one side, I don't know, 14 on the other. All new planks from the water line, a little below the water line, all the way up to the rails. I built the whole back of the boat. Built about a half of this boat. It took me almost 2 years to get this boat right. My grandfather, I bet he did the same thing. I bet you my grandfather bought a junky boat, come to Gloucester, fixed it up, and went fishing. So I get into this in the 90s. I buy a boat, I think I'm all set. My permit says I'm all set in the 90s. But 91, 92 comes and you start changing the laws, and I say, wait a minute. No business in this state or in this country would even open a business if they told you next week you might not be in business, right? No one's gonna do that. I wouldn't do it either. So shouldn't you have told me before these laws might be changed and you might not be able to make a living at it before I invested everything I got? You know, killing myself doing it, sacrificing everything. Listen, there was a lot of jobs in this town. You know, people used to come from everywhere here and you could get a job. You could come to this town and within 20 minutes you'd be working. Now, I watch all these kids, no hope, no nothing, they're all doing dope. There's no jobs. There's nothing for them to say, hey, this is what I am. I smoked weed, I drank, you know, not like what's going on now. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. It's a shame, because they got no hope. That's why I didn't even go to Fiesta this year, because I'm gonna go fishing. You know what I mean? Now most fishermen would have run to Fiesta. But why? I don't even see why they're all down there. There's no fishermen, there's no boats at the blessing of the fleet. There was a lot of fish. There was a lot of fish here, you know. There was Ipswich Bay would be full of herring. I mean, you'd look in the sounding machine, they'd be from the top to the bottom, solid red, just loaded with fish. It ain't like that no more. Even if you stopped it, I don't think you'd see those numbers of fish come back. When I first started, you could go anywhere in the ocean and go fishing. Right? We could go all the way up to the end of the Bay of Fundy and go fishing if you wanted to. Oh, after that, you couldn't do that no more. Guys used to go all the way to Grand Banks fishing. You know what I mean? That stopped, you know. In the 1920s and the 1930s, fishermen made a lot of money. You know, you can go to the graveyard and you can look at the stones they built. And you got to say, where'd they get this money? And they went fishing. It's all fishing boats, all statues of saints. You know, we have a big fiesta blessing in St. Peter. Patrons say to the fishermen, but there's nobody left. You know, there's me and 3 other boats that work the state waters off of Gloucester. I don't think there's going to be any more. I think that this fiesta is all over. You know, it's a shame, but you know, a lot of fish they won't let us bring in. We got to throw it away, and I don't understand it, but.
And what a joy it is for us to come together as a community, as followers of Jesus, to honor one of his first, St. Peter, apostle and patron of our fishermen. We give great thanks and praise to God this day that we can gather on a more beautiful day than last year, and that God has graced us with sun and with breeze and with one another. So let us unite our hearts and our minds as we always begin our prayer. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. The Lord be with you. My brothers and sisters, the Lord our God is truly merciful. When we approach him with our hearts contrite and humbled, he offers us his forgiveness and always extends his hand in friendship.
How are you, Mrs. Mayor?
I'm exhausted. Thank you to the Gloucester fishermen. We had over 80 pounds of fish. We had over 40 pounds of shrimp. We had over 40 pounds of Modiga steaks, over 40 pounds of sausage. We had over 15 pounds of mixed spaghetti, Nayalini, and meat sauce. We had over 30 pounds of potato string bean salads. We had over 24 pounds of cleaned lobster. I made seafood casseroles, everything you can think of. And I even made a gluten-free for my friends. I did gray sole on the bottom, I did a seafood in the middle, and gray sole on the top with some little seasoning so she can have a lasagna with gluten-free. Yep, and everything is gone. Everything. Tiramisu's, the dessert, everything is gone.
You didn't save anything for me, huh?
Except the mess. Honey, I'll cook for you anyway.
Hey, Sergeant.
You know I love to cook.
Hey, Shep, I thought she was gonna walk.
No, I can't move.
He's the boss, you don't walk.
Oh, dude, that's a look from last night.
You know, it's funny. When I went to go, my mission was just don't get hurt. Like, I knew I mean, there have been serious injuries out there, and now I just figured I would take 2 steps, fall off, be done. Just wanted to be able to hear my grandfather's voice across that beach. And then I got consumed by the real spirit of it, Dooms. And there I am, is dressed up as Captain America. A cousin of mine is dressed up as Colonel Sanders, and then another cousin is dressed up as a chicken, you know, and so.
Viva San Pedro! Siamo tutti muti! Viva San Pedro! Viva! 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 Viva!
It's so irreverent, right? It's guys in drag and guys in Halloween costumes. I mean, the one guy who was like organizing the whole thing, who's calling off the names of the list, is in a mini skirt with a blonde wig, right? And everybody's just listening, like, all right, yeah, whatever you say. And it was nobody at any, you know, when you can stand in a mini skirt and a blonde wig, and be like, you know, this hulking guy, and it doesn't diminish your authority or at one bit. That's a good day, man. My grandfather didn't want me to do anything he did. Didn't want me to go be a fisherman. I went to be a fisherman. He was like, don't be a fisherman. I was a fisherman, so you wouldn't have to be a fisherman. And I couldn't explain to him, I want to be a fisherman because you're a fisherman. You know, he was my hero. I mean, I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life. You know, I did it for a while, and I was like, all right, now I'm gonna go back to college. But yeah, it was a good move.
And then law school.
Yeah, grad school and then law school again. And now here I am got about $250,000 worth of education in this head. I'm going to knock it all out right now. Give me a shoulder.
Got it, cuz. Let's go, cuz. Let's go, cuz. First and only time you need.
Gloucester, Massachusetts, holding on to my soul like the red flag at the end of the greasy pole.
There you go, guys. There you go. Viva! Viva!
Well, I was sitting here yesterday on this very bench, and I saw what I thought was a dog walking down the sidewalk, and he looked really friendly. So as he got closer, I said, hello, and he came up and put his head right here, and I patted him, and then he climbed up and sat next to me, and we just sat here for a while, and then after a while, he wandered away. A man came by from this way, and he saw that the coyote had been right next to me. And he said, oh, ma'am, you should be careful. That's a coyote. And I said, that's a coyote? I had no idea. It wasn't like any other dog I'd ever seen, but it was kind of those colors, browns and grays, and had kind of a pointed nose. But it wasn't in the least bit threatening.
He just put his nose right up next to you.
Yep, right, just about on my lap.
As if he wanted a treat or something?
Well, it was, I felt like he just wanted some attention. I thought he just wanted me to pat him, so that's what I did.
The government programs came into Gloucester in a pretty big way. And we have, as a result, an incredible collection of WPA murals in Gloucester centered around City Hall. The 30s in Gloucester must have been incredible. It was the time of the New Deal. Artists had support from government programs. There were hotels here who realized that for their business, if they had basically what were artists in residence, people would come up to study with the artists, stay in the hotels. There was plenty of subject matter that appealed to artists in those days. The schooners, the fishermen. It was extremely picturesque in terms of industrial subject matter, and of course, as we all know, in terms of beauty and natural subject matter. I think it does still exist, but not like it did, and not like, I don't think it's going to continue to be really flourishing because those people aren't going to be able to afford to live here anymore. And that to me is really sad.
The first apartment I rented by myself, I mean, it was very Gloucester. It was an old building. Parisi's fishing gear was downstairs, and you know, the whole thing. You'd hear the music. In the spring, you would hear the music, the Italian songs, the Pavarotti and everything coming from the fishing boats, because in the spring they'd all be painting the boats, and so that was great. It was a great atmosphere. And I'd go down there, and Patsy Frontero still says, I remember when you'd paint a boat and trade for a fish, you know, which is true. I used to trade for fish and stuff. So I painted pictures on all the fishing boats, and some of them I still have here. On the pilot houses, I would paint, you know, got one. The Sea Fox was one in particular that's the one I have here. Sea Fox, it was on the pilot house, also of the little bayers of the Testaverde. It's the same family, Testaverde family. But so I got to know those guys, you know, pretty well. And and my bedroom was on the top floor, so I could get up there, stick my head up. I had a little ladder, and I would climb up and look out the skylight. At 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I could see all the boats coming in. They'd be coming in the stream right around that breakwater. All the old wooden fishing draggers, and day fishermen. They come in 3, 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So I'd hustle myself from my apartment down to the wharf and get my fish. So, hey, you want a fish? I give it to you. Oh yeah. The painting behind me is the painting of the famous bird's eye. That building had something that very, very, you know, unusual in that unique, very unique setting. The setting was unique. The way the light would hit it in the afternoon, because when the sun went down and it illuminated that this whole back side of the building turned orange, really, in that orange light, because it was painted white. It just glowed like this. I would walk over there sometimes just to look at it. Couldn't believe that orange glow coming off of the white stucco. So it was, to me, it was, you know, it was pretty amazing.
So I guess you don't know anybody that's still fighting the fight, huh?
Helen Garland.
Who's Helen Garland?
Helen Garland's still fighting the fight, trying to save Gloucester.
My late husband, Joe Garland, wrote numerous volumes about Gloucester. In The Fish and the Falcon, he tells us the Battle of Gloucester took place on August 8, 1775, while the British Army was surrounded in Boston Harbor by Washington's young army. He loved this story, and the fact that right here is where the Falcon, over my left shoulder, where the Falcon was waiting, and they made the big mistake of going into Gloucester. Little did Lindsay know that Gloucester had established a crack militia responding to the alarms of church bells and cannon fire, greeting the exposed British landing parties as they came ashore, facing withering fire from the militia. After fierce fighting, the Brits left many troops killed or captured as they retreated in their boats back to the Falcon, having neither captured the beach schooner nor destroyed the city of Gloucester. The fish in the Falcon really brings back the whole story of what made Gloucester so special. And we don't give it away today. And I just hope that somehow all that history will save Gloucester from becoming something other than what it historically was.
The famous story about Blackburn, Grace Alphears ran into some real bad weather. So Blackburn got assigned to a man named Thomas Welch as dory mate. And they come out into some weather and they got lost at sea. A winter squall came with a snow as thick as tar and cold northeast wind. And they couldn't find the schooner.
And one of the things that could happen is that the dory can become lost in the fog, lost from the vessel. So the vessel knows where the dories were set, and they can go back and forth over those grounds to try to pick them up. The men can try to row back, or if there's a wind, there's a little staysail in that dory, try to get back.
That happened quite often, and especially that particular year, I believe it was late 1800s. There was the year that the Grace Alphears lost Blackburn, that 209 men were lost, 17 vessels with all hands. It was a tough year for storms.
Every day they've got to row. They're rowing, trying to row towards land with tides pushing them back, with weather pushing them back. And the land they try to get to is Newfoundland. Newfoundland is sparsely settled. Even if they land, there may not be any people that can help them. And eventually, Blackburn's doryman dies in the boat. He's dead in the boat. Blackburn now knows there's not two men to control the boat. What he does is he puts water over his fingers, freezes his hands on the two oars so they'll never be lost. And so when and if he's awake, and he knows he may never awake again, he's able to row towards land.
He started to realize he would lose his fingers, so he just froze his hands to the oars, literally curled his hands around the oars and just kept rowing.
I mean, how many people could do that? Just put your hands on an oar and say, this is it, you know? Just going to keep rowing till I mean, it seems them fishermen back then were pretty rugged guys.
As he tired with exhaustion and fatigue, his oars would occasionally hit, and he could see a chip of flesh break off his finger or the side of his hand.
And I think it took 4 or 5 days, and he ended up in Newfoundland, and a family brought him in. His dory mate had frozen the dory.
And the boat half sunk. He pulled into a river, found an old abandoned, remember this is middle of the winter off of Newfoundland. Nobody goes very far, there's not a lot of activity. He found an old abandoned camp up a river.
Local people eventually find him. They take him in. These are as poor people as you can imagine, have very little food, very little way to do, but they decide that he's still alive, and they bring him in. What he's going to do now is lose his fingers. They're going to freeze off.
He lost all his fingers. He lost his thumbs to the first knuckle, and he lost several toes as well. I'm not sure what the process is when frostbite sets in and gangrene. They have to cut some away. I know there was flesh needed to be cut away to prevent spreading of frostbite to that extreme. But it was a long, very painful process.
He was in so much pain that he just wanted to die. Because when he started thawing out, and they really didn't know what to do for a frostbitten person back then, you know. So they just kept giving him hot towels to put on his, but I guess that's the worst thing you can do. From what I hear, you're supposed to slowly warm them up with cold water. And just, yeah.
What happened to his fingers?
They're probably still in Newfoundland.
Rumor has it they buried Thomas Welch and Howard Blackburn's fingers in the same grave.
So when he gets back to Gloucester, he becomes a hero. I mean, this is an unbelievable story. Everybody had put him off for dead months ago. And his doormate, of course, is dead, but he's alive. And he's going to come down and he's going to run a bar on Main Street in Gloucester, and the bar's still there. The bar restaurant is still there.
He stayed in Newfoundland for at least another 3 months till he was able to come back to Gloucester. They had to amputate his toes and fingers. All he had was thumbs left, and then the people in Gloucester rallied around him and raised some money so he could open a little tavern, which he did, which is still in existence today.
Mm-hmm. My relatives tell me my grandfather, like all the other fishermen in town, knew him and liked him, and they would go in there to have a drink. So, and during Prohibition, he was smart enough to run some whiskey.
10 years ago, we had 200 boats in our commercial fleet. Now we're down to 60, and it's getting worse every day. And the worst part is, none of the younger kids want to go fishing. They're discouraged because of all the quotas and the restrictions that NOTO has placed. If you was a father of a kid growing up in the city and you was looking at what's going on, I don't think you'd try to convince your kid to go fishing. Tell them, go to college, get a degree, and go work for NOAA. You might as well be on the other side of the fence. You can't beat them, join them. The science, in my opinion, is a major problem. And the major problem is we don't believe that their science is correct. But under the law, we're screwed. They put in restrictions, but somehow or another, according to their science, our cod is not coming back, if you believe their science.
The example of the cod and the haddock, they have different genomes, and so these genomes can be recognized using the techniques that we're actually implementing here in the Institute. And so not only that, though, is that different varieties of cod or haddock or other types of fish, obviously, or any marine life can be recognized because they don't always have the very same genome. So you might think, for example, that cod from Norway might have a slightly different genetic footprint, a different genome than the varieties that we have here. And so that's a way to basically follow what different varieties of cod might be doing in terms of migration, for example. If you can, it's again back to this forensic DNA idea. By looking at the subtypes of genomes that we might find in different places, you might then be able to infer from that how these different varieties might be actually migrating, where they live, where they spawn, etc. For those who are passionate and want to learn, is if they have a high school degree and they haven't thought that that it was time to go to college yet, and they're willing to learn something very specific in 1 year is to basically have them coming over, and they have 2 wonderful teachers who take care of them most of the year, they basically learn not only how to perform an experiment with DNA, but also they learn the theory behind it, the basics of what it means to sequence DNA and what the results are actually going to tell you.
After I graduated, I went on to Salem State, but I was a double major in English and biology, and I was doing really well, but after the first semester they caught an error on my taxes that took away all of my financial aid. So I just went into the workforce. And I approached Mary Kay Taylor at Maritime Gloucester. So I asked her if she had anything. She knew I was interested in marine biology. And she took me on as the front desk person. And then eventually the schooner Ardell came in. And when schooner Ardell came in, they wanted to run some classes on the boat. So they had me go onto the boat. And when I started learning that, I fell in love with it. So I phased out of the museum and then completely onto the boat. And then I was, in the summertime, I'm full-time boat crew. And I would go out and spend my days bringing tourists on tours of the harbor and educating kids, and it was a lot of fun. And then about this time last year, Tom Balf from Maritime Gloucester emailed me and told me about this program. And when I read into it, I thought, wow, they made this for me. And this program is, they're taking what would be a 2-year program at a regular community college, and they're condensing it into about 6 months and then a 12-week internship. So I'm just about done with that 6 months of classes. And it's been great, hands-on. We're spending at least 3 hours in the lab every single day, which is just amazing. And I've learned a lot through this process and really got an interest in genetics and microbiology. And I really want to end up combining those interests and coming together with Harold and hopefully getting someone who wants us to build them a research boat where I could hopefully captain it and be one of the chief scientists and go around and work on ocean conservation and stewardship, and yeah.
This morning, the ravenous sea reaches way out over the shore and pulls back again, powerfully driven to contain itself. I hear the hull of water over 100,000 stones. Oh, the sound of longing. Hush, rock, hustle, huddle, huddle, hush. The crockery and surge, water taking the shape of stones. This great symphonic jostling of all that comes in, of all that pulls out, of all that remains.
Hmm.